Today we will take a brief survey of Heaney's poetry, Death of a Naturalist. So there are few points which we will discuss today. His maiden work, the naturalist in his work, personal Helicon, reason for writing, use of sensual imagery, and then conclusion. First, his maiden work. Heaney has been called the most important Irish poet since Yeats. Critics have been mostly positive about his work, and it remains hugely popular, selling by the tens of thousands. His first book of poems, Death of a Naturalist, was published by Faber and Faber in 1966, when Heaney was just 27 years old. It was unusually well received for a first collection, and critics subsequently had huge expectations of him, comparing him to previous greats such as Wordsworth. The theme running through his first collection is nature, images of his native hometown and his farm Mossbawn. This is where he grew up, and he was very much attached to it. His early influences come through in his volume, were so more than the others: Robert Frost, Ted Hughes, Wordsworth, mainly Hopkins, and even Dante. Next point is the naturalist in his work. The naturalist of the title is a child whom Wordsworth or Blake would have reorganized. He is a naturalist in two senses. Firstly, because he lives in a close relationship with nature, and secondly, because he acts in accordance with his instincts rather than the rules of society. Heaney's first book is people with such free spirits, whom it is difficult to tie down, to hold back. The child praying and fingering slim impersonal Helicon, splashing delightedly through the suckling clabber in poem. Heaney's children experience a moment of intense drama which changes them forever, perhaps paralleling his own childhood experiences which changed him. The death of his brother, which he records in Midterm Break, a poem about a father's helplessness in the face of death, forces his young son to take responsibility, may be the turning point which changed Heaney. The subsequent move away from Mossbawn affected him deeply, and nowhere does he write so fondly and with such great affection as he writes of his early days spent in the farm. Just as the naturalist of the poem, he himself had uninhibited freedom to roam the countryside, dwelling on the delights of nature. Next point is personal Helicon. The poem Personal Helicon is dedicated to Michael Longley, a member of Hobsbawm group. It's a group. It introduces an abiding interest and concern for that which lies deep within the earth. Mount Helicon is a mountain in Greece, which according to ancient myth was sacred to Apollo, and from it flowed two fountains of poetic inspiration. Heaney is here portraying his own fountain of inspiration, the dark drop into the depths of the wells of his childhood memories. Though he has now grown up and is too mature to scramble about on his hands and knees, looking into deep crevices of the earth, he can do that in his poetry, glimpses into the places where there is no reflection. Only the sound of a rhyme like a bucket setting, the darkness echoing. By the time this volume was written, Heaney had come to understand the reason for that moment of early sorrow. In this collection, he is grieving for what he calls the fall into manhood and the subsequent loss of childhood. As he tries to defend that secret nest of childhood, his small, imperfect limits would keep breaking, just like the dams he recalls building in poem, which burst before the rising autumn rain. Next is reason for writing. What was the reason for his writing? A Appearing for the first time in public with poems about the loss of childhood is risky, as it inevitably brought him comparison with poets such as Blake and Wordsworth. For Heaney, however, it was not so much a choice as a compulsion. He seems to be relieving himself of a burden, at the same time honoring an obligation. He is not interested in analyzing those events of the past. He just pens them down in an effort to acknowledge them and set himself free. Like a filmmaker, he freezes the last frame of a poem at the moment of pained discovery, like the childhood who turns from the flax dam or stands at the foot of his brother's 4-foot coffin, leaving a stark image in the mind of the reader. These poems can be seen not only as lyrical evocations of loss, but also a portrait of the state of mind of the poet. A sense of guilt and alienation from his family comes across in this volume. Digging in Followers elaborates on this theme. Coming from a family of rural farmers who are not particularly literary, for him to make the decision to become a poet was not easy, most likely a path fraught with obstacles. There was so much use of sensual imagery, like W.B. Yeats. To recreate the world of his childhood, Heaney has made use of the senses. His poems are filled with color, packed with images of sight, smell, taste, and touches. This volume presents a precisely detailed picture of Mossbawn, its people, their work, their customs, and their language. The sense of place is intense. The people of Mossbawn move in and out of the poems, too absorbed in their work to stop and speak. The work these people do and their places of work are minutely observed. So, what is the conclusion of all this discussion about the death of a naturalist? Death of a naturalist is drawn by conflicting impulses, a sense of releasing a newfound independence on the one hand, and a desire to recapture what is lost on the other. As Heaney has said, poetry is out of this quarrel with ourselves. Through verbalizing the quarrel, Heaney finds his poetic voice.